This is the Linguistics Podcast. Questions or comments can be directed to Twitter at LinguistChris or via email to linguistchris@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to the Linguistics Podcast. My name is Chris, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about the issue of prescription versus description in linguistics, and this is actually a biggie. I think I always say that, but this one, it's really true. So basically the idea is this: linguistics is a descriptive discipline, and most of what people think of when they hear things like grammar is prescriptivism. So it's really something that we have to explain, I think, if anyone's going to fully understand the issues that we talk about in this podcast. So, first off, what's meant by prescriptivism? Well, I think it's best to start from this side because it's the more traditional view of grammar, like I just said. If somebody is going around correcting people's grammar and saying, oh, well, you shouldn't say things that way, you should say things this way, that's a prescriptivist position. They're prescribing to people how things should be done. Okay, and there's a lot of classic examples of this, especially in English grammar. We have things like, don't end a sentence with a preposition. Or, as I like to say, to upset the prescriptivists, a preposition is something you should never end a sentence with. That's a classic example of a prescriptivist attitude towards grammar. Another one is, don't split an infinitive. So if you remember, the English infinitive, at least in classical terms, is defined as to plus a base form of a verb. So something like to love would be an English infinitive. And apparently bad grammar to prescriptivists is something like to not love would be a sham or something bad, right? To not love, that would be to split an infinitive because you're taking the to and the love, and you're putting something in between them. And apparently that's incorrect. Now, I'll get into a moment why linguistics is not really concerned with that, but the point is that if you're telling somebody how they should speak, that is technically prescriptivism. Okay? Now, linguistics, like I said, is a descriptive field. So we're really focused on the other half of the coin. And the fact is that there are two types of rules you can come up with concerning grammar. Now, prescriptivist rules are what I just detailed. Things like don't end a sentence in a preposition, don't split an infinitive. These are prescriptivist grammar rules, and they're really focused on stylistic issues, right? So you have the option of ending a sentence in a preposition or not ending a sentence in a preposition in English. And prescriptivists will say, don't do it, right? This is their attitude towards things. Don't do it because it doesn't sound right or something like that. Now, a linguist would say, well, I don't care if you do it or not, but whatever you do, I'm going to analyze it. Right? That's the descriptivist position. I want to describe what you choose and look at how that fits into the overall language. Okay? Now, does that mean that grammar doesn't actually have rules? Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. And at this point in the podcast, it's best to switch gears a little bit and talk about generative grammar. Okay, now I've mentioned this, I believe, in a previous podcast briefly. Generative grammar was what was brought on by this sort of Chomskyan revolution, Noam Chomsky, who released a book called Syntactic Structures in 1957. And really what it did to linguistics was it changed the paradigm. Okay, so now, previous to Chomsky, linguistics, of course, did exist, but it was focused on looking at existing utterances, or in the case of syntax, existing phrases, and breaking them down into structures, right? And what Chomsky said is, why don't we work the other way? So why don't we come up with rules for the grammar which describe all the possible sentences you can make, right? So you're not looking at just what phrases have been uttered or have been created in the past, but you're coming up with rules which can describe all possible phrases. And if a phrase, so it's a two-sided coin, right? So if you come up with a phrase from your rules that a native English speaker says, no, that's not right, like that doesn't make sense, that's ungrammatical, then your rules have gone too far. And if there exists a phrase that an English speaker can come up with that your rules don't account for, then your rules have not gone far enough, right? That's the idea. And this is all based, of course, on native speaker intuition, which is an incredibly reliable method of telling grammaticality. So if I say something like, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, you know that that is grammatical. It might not mean anything, but you know in your mind that that's grammatical. Whereas if I say, let's see, colorless sleep furiously green ideas, you know that that doesn't make sense. It's not grammatical. Not only does it not have a meaning, but it's not grammatical. It's agrammatical, if you will, or ungrammatical. You hear a lot. And that's just based on speaker intuition, right? So what is the point of generative grammar? The point of generative grammar is to come up with grammar rules which can accurately describe how the language is working. Now, what would never be in generative grammar? A rule that allows you to make sentences with a preposition inside them, but not to make sentences with the preposition at the end. That would be a leak of prescriptivism into the descriptivist paradigm, right? And we don't want that. Clearly, English allows you to end sentences in a preposition. As I said earlier in this podcast, a preposition is something you should not end a sentence with. That sentence makes perfect sense. Now, to some of you, certainly it will sound a little funky. Let me put it that way. So let's quickly discuss the difference between funky and ungrammatical, because there is a big difference there. Now, the problem with something like don't end a sentence in a preposition is that it's a prescriptivist rule that's been on the books for a long time, some 400 years, and its history is sort of complex, and it has to do with at the time Latin was considered sort of linguistic perfection, and so dictionary makers at the time were trying to come up with grammar rules to sort of improve English, and one of those rules was never end a sentence in a preposition. Now, there is no syntactic reason that you can't end a sentence in a preposition in English. In fact, 400 years later, even after drilling this into children's heads, people still end sentences with prepositions all the time. And if you work in corpus linguistics, where you're actually sort of doing old school linguistics, you're looking at what people have actually uttered, that's how you see this, that people really do it all the time. And for that reason, it's clear that there's no descriptivist reason why you can't end a sentence in a preposition. It is purely prescriptive. So linguistics, clearly, if we were coming up with grammar rules, they would account for both cases: ending a sentence in a preposition and using a preposition in other positions, right? Similarly to split and infinitive. In linguistics, we generally don't speak of infinitives in English, I should say. We speak of base forms. Why? Well, something like to love, the to really serves no purpose there. Love is the verb. To is a preposition. In fact, to is always a preposition. So some words can sort of switch categories. To is always a preposition. So it's unclear why dictionaries, especially foreign language dictionaries, when they translate. So if you have a German language dictionary, for example, and you look up lieben, you'll find that it says in English it means to love. And it's kind of like, well, what's that to doing there? And it becomes especially crazy when you realize that to do a certain type of German infinitive, you actually have to add a zu lieben. Es ist schwer zu lieben. It's hard to love. And it's unclear why that zu has to be there if it already means to love, right? So it really does add more problems than it solves. And so in linguistics, we really don't deal with to in English infinitives. We just say that English has a base form of a verb, and that would be, in this case, love. And then to inflect that, you do things to the base form. Note that you never do anything to the to inflect, which again makes it dubious. So that is prescription versus description. Hopefully, I think that's about as clear as I can make it. It's one of those things that will sort of sink in over time, I think. But it is an important issue, right? In linguistics, we're not telling people how they should speak. That's something you'll never hear from a true linguist. You'll never hear, don't split that infinitive, right? In fact, if they're really a true linguist, you'll never hear, if they're talking about English, you'll never hear about infinitives, period. So that's the podcast for today. I want to thank all of you for listening. I know it's been a while between podcasts, but thank you for waiting and for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again.